we go.
Hey.
Wow. Whatever you did at work.
To continue, and we're in business.
Good job, Missy.
Go ahead, Mark.
Okay.
Mark.
Welcome, everyone. This is Thursday, June 10th, 2021. And tonight we're going to be talking about green community choice aggregation, which is the combining electric choice and municipalization into one thing. We're going to have two presenters tonight, Dr. Missy Stultz, who's the Director of the Office of Sustainability and Innovation, and Paul Fenn, who's the founder and president of Local Power. Tonight's being hosted by myself, Mark Clevey. I'm the Vice President of the Renewable Energy Association, Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association. Tonight's financial sponsors are the Michigan Department of Environmental Great Lakes Energy, EGLE, and McNaughton McKay solar supplier in Ann Arbor. We are celebrating our 30-year anniversary this year. Great Lakes has been around since 1991, and it continues to be supported by members to educate and advocate for renewable energy in the Great Lakes. Our Zoom series is hosted every Thursday. We do a Zoom series. The clean energy seminar that I do is just one. That's done the second Thursday of each month. The first Thursday of each month, we have Ann Arbor Solar Stories, which are case studies about solar installations in Ann Arbor. Again, on Thursday, the clean energy seminars. On Thursday, the third Thursday of each month, we have same thing, Detroit Solar Stories, which is hosted by Diane Van Buren, who's our board of directors member of GLREA. Same issue, doing case studies on solar installations in Detroit. And then the fourth Thursday of each month, we do sort of an open session, My Solar Stories, hosted by John Sarver, which is an energy Q&A. It's also a time when we can talk about specific issues of interest that have come up in the previous month. The Clean Energy Seminar Series is a new thing that was started this year. And it covers topics of particular interest to clean energy users, businesses, advocates, and stakeholders. Our seminars include a content ranging from technology to business to public policy. The first session of each year is a status update on clean energy in Michigan from the perspective of the industry, electric utilities, and state government. And that sort of sets the tone for the remaining sessions of the year. It's a CES has started out as a Zoom event, and I don't see any reason why we're not going to continue to do it this way going forward. Any related questions, comments, and suggestions about it should be directed to me. My email is here, mclevey123@gmail.com. We ask that you remember to please mute yourself and hold all questions until the end of the presentation, and then raise your hand under reactions to ask a question, and the host moderator will call on you. There are ways that you can continue to work with GLRA and support us beyond coming to the seminar series. One is if you're a member, you can renew your membership with GLREA. We did a little study this year about it that a couple of people had not renewed for a year or so, and they were as surprised as we were. But if you are a member, watch your membership. You can financially sponsor a GLREA membership for a local teacher and or student. We recently had a GLREA member do just that for their children. You can grow our membership, encourage others to join GLREA and become a whole part of the whole solution. And lastly, make a financial donation to GLREA to support our work. You can do that by contacting our executive director, John Freeman, and his email is below. So tonight, it's my sincere pleasure to welcome Dr. Missy Stultz, who is the director of the City of Ann Arbor Office of Sustainability and Innovation, and Paul Fenn, who's the founder and president of Local Power. Our speakers tonight will discuss the Community Choice Aggregation, or CCA. While Washington and Lansing dawdle over what to do about climate change, local governments in Michigan can, if they so choose, speed up the transition to a clean energy train right now. Michigan is an electric choice state where ratepayers can purchase electricity from an alternative supplier while still receiving transmission and distribution services from existing utility providers such as DTE and Consumers Energy. Community choice aggregation is also known as municipal aggregation, is an electric choice option that allows local governments to procure green power in the open market on behalf of its residents, businesses, and municipal accounts. Michigan only needs to update its existing and current electric choice laws to lift the cap and allow for a new green choice option, community choice aggregation. Some believe that community choice aggregation is a legislative impossibility in Michigan because our utilities and their fossil fuel partners are just too strong, or our government is too inept, or our citizens are just too timid and cowed by our utilities. Thank goodness our speakers tonight are not part of this naysayer crowd. Our current issue of MI Sun Rising contains an article on community choice aggregation. Those wishing to receive it, which will cover many of the things that are covered tonight, can simply email me and I will send it to them. Missy and Paul, welcome to GLR's Clean Energy Seminar, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Well, I think Paul and I coordinated, and I'm going to kick it off. But before I share some slides here, I want to say thank you all so much for the incredible work that you do across this state to realize the clean energy future that we all want and deserve. And so thank you. You really are the champions in this landscape. In terms of the cadence for the presentation today, I'm just going to give a little bit of context to what's happening in Ann Arbor and why community choice aggregation, kind of some of the history. And then Paul is going to tell you a little bit more about the evolution. And what we're really interested in Ann Arbor is actually what's known as CCA 3.0. And that will make sense shortly, what we mean by that. So really excited to share the stage with Paul. I'll go pretty fast and furious. And while I'm pulling up my slides, I want to say a heartfelt thank you to John and to Mark in particular for organizing this series and giving us a chance to be here today. Thank you. So via fun show of hands, how many of you have heard of A20? Yes, amazing. Okay, great. A20 is the city of Ann Arbor's plan to achieve a just transition to community-wide carbon neutrality by 2030. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this other than the process and why CCA made its way in. So as we were looking to create this plan, which just celebrated its 1-year anniversary last year, we had to come up with some values really to ground our work, to really center it and understand how are we going to select what was included in this plan and what was not included. And so the 3 values, and this is important because CCA touches upon them, is equity, sustainability, and transformation. And I'm sure, I hope the first 2 make sense, right? We don't want to do this on the backs of low income or Black and brown or Indigenous populations. We need to do this in a way that those who are hurt first and worst by climate change actually benefit first and most by the solutions that we identify. Of course, this has to be a sustainable transformation that we're undertaking. We're going to get it wrong. No one's done this, right? So it's okay not to succeed the first time as long as we keep learning and iterate and grow. And transformation, which I'm sure some of you have heard me say before, because the system we have right now doesn't work. It doesn't work for a whole lot of people. It may work for us on the line in some ways, but a whole lot of people are left out of that. And as I hear my 6-year-old downstairs laughing and giggling, I want to make sure that she can have a really great future too. So transformation is necessary. And of course, as we did this, it was informed by our greenhouse gas inventory. I'm not going to belabor this other than to say, for us, the largest source of emissions by far is our built infrastructure. And it's the energy we use in that infrastructure, whether that is the electricity that's powering our lights and some of our appliances, or whether that's the natural gas, right, that's powering our heating and cooling systems. And so we've got to tackle this. And so what we ended up doing, going out, was talking to a whole bunch of people, right? We talked to peer cities, what are vanguards doing, both domestically and internationally. We certainly looked at the academic literature. We looked at the peer-reviewed literature. We looked at gray literature, things like drawdown. We spent a lot of time with really trying to understand how you piece this together. We certainly talked to the public, and we leveraged expertise that we have in the community through technical advisory committees, as well as our staff itself. And so all of this went through this process, which was super intense, amazingly chaotic, and beautiful. I loved it. We talked to, we estimate at least 1 in every 10 Ann Arborites engaged in some way, shape, or form in the creation of this plan. And I want to share this because the very first phase was ideation. And people threw everything you can imagine at us, you know, and we didn't say no to anything. We said, just tell us whatever idea you have. And as we think about the renewable energy sector, or our very first strategy, which you'll see in a second in A20, is we have to power our electrical grid with 100% renewable energy, bar none. There just isn't an alternative. And so people thought about lots of things, right? We certainly named the things we talk about: community solar, rooftop generation, We talked about large utility scale solar and buys. We talked about municipalization, and we talked about CCA. And so we had all these ideas on the table, and then we started to prioritize them. And our plan has a goal of 2030. And so as we went through this and we were thinking about equity and we were thinking about access and we were thinking about the time frame and transferability, how can others do what we're doing? Those were really important core tenets. And what ended up happening pretty quickly is CCA bubbled to the top. It bubbled to the top, not because it's easy, but because it actually solves for a lot of the problems if we're able to do it and brave enough as a state to do it. It actually opens up a lot of new opportunities and helps many, many other local governments potentially replicate the work that we're doing, acknowledging that we are a really high capacity community. We have staff. Most places don't have staff doing this work. So what a shame if we find a solution that just works in Ann Arbor that can't be transferred somewhere else. So the CCA popped very fast as a solution the public was really interested in. It looked hard, but really exciting. And then we pivoted to the third phase, which is how are we going to do this? And Paul's going to talk a little bit about what others have done. Just want to share that CCA made it. It's the number, it's the very first strategy. You cannot read this. The color coding breaks out, it's the very first action. Sorry, a little lazy with my words. Strategies for us, we only have 7 strategies. They're cross-cutting, and we have 44 actions. So community choice aggregation is action number 1 and strategy number 1. And what that is I mentioned this before, that's powering our electrical grid with 100% renewable energy. So highlighting that it exists right there. What I want to share here, last 2 slides before I kick it to Paul, is when we talk about community choice aggregation, there's lots of different models. And CCAs have been around for quite a while, and they have evolved. We've learned a lot from the very first models. We've learned a lot from the second generation models. And now we're pretty excited by the 3rd generation models that actually focus on things that we may not think about when we think about CCA, and certainly our utilities do not talk about when they try to kill CCAs. So Mark teed this up. CCA would allow, the way we're thinking about it, a local government to procure power on behalf of our community. So a vote of the people would give me the right to go out and purchase at likely a much lower rate, 100% renewable energy, for example, and then get that energy to be new, Michigan made, union labor, you name it. Like the community would decide what those criteria were, and we could go procure. And we know from data that we would expect to see at least cost parity. I say at least cost parity because it depends on how many things we sort of tack on of what we're looking for. In many cases, people actually save and can save pretty significantly. But that's not all, because depending on the design, which again, Paul's going to dive into this a little bit more, it's not just about procuring energy somewhere else. CCA 3.0 would actually allow us to do deep work in other areas of A20, things that we all care about and we all struggle with. We call it the peas and the carrots of energy efficiency. If we designed a CCA that really focused on investments in the local economy, we could be supporting really significant improvements in comfort in people's homes. And guess what? We could pair that with on-site generation. So sure, we could procure outside of the limits, but we could also maximize how much local energy that we're generating with local jobs and those dollars staying in our local economy. We could also do electrification work, whether that's appliances or vehicles. We could do microgridding. We could be supporting battery technology. And all of this could center equity in our work. This isn't a pipe dream. It's actually something that's possible. And as I'll tee you up, it's about to come to you. One thing that I say a lot to myself more than anyone else when I feel discouraged, because it's true. This is not a small lift. This is a big lift in Michigan. But every single law that we fight against in the state and that we push on or that we hold to was written by a human, which means we can rewrite every single one. We just have to find the pathway, the strength, and the perseverance to do it. And I'm excited to be on that journey with all of you and with people like Paul. So with that, I'm going to kick it to Paul to tell you a little bit more about the details of CCA. Go for it, Paul. You are on mute, Paul.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled to be participating in this. I love kind of breakthrough moments, which primarily depend on people that somehow get into the position to implement a breakthrough and want to, which is in my experience is a fairly rare thing. So really thrilled to be here. Can you see my screen here?
Yeah, we can, Paul. It's just not in presentation mode yet.
Yeah, I'm afraid if I go to presentation, but last time I did it, I got a bad thing happened. But let's see what happens.
Blow up our computers.
Yeah.
Wow. It
How are we
turned-
doing now? How are we doing? It's loading. It's bad. Okay, how about
Oh,
that?
there we go.
There it goes.
Looks great.
All right.
All right.
So, Michigan. And I want to get into framing now, because the subject of choice is so important in the debate in Michigan and the controversy of choice. I want to kind of frame different kinds of choice. And monopoly is obviously the status quo. Choice is this broad category that says people should be able to choose. And there are different versions of what that means. Deregulation is one of them. And that's something that occurred. That's when I got involved in this in the early 1990s in various states, leading to an energy crisis in California, and it became controversial since then. So the word deregulation is controversial. Community choice aggregation is my presentation, and it really is a kind of a third sibling in this scheme of things, because it was not the idea of deregulation to create CCA. Deregulation was about individual customer choice and about the theory that would lead itself to meaningful choice. Community choice aggregation was a sideshow, initially a marginal player that said small buyers will not benefit from these choice systems. We need to have communities acting in concert to give buying power to consumers and to command terms. Part of commanding terms is to get a better price. Part of commanding terms is to improve the quality of the product. So choice can mean very little. The word choice can mean nothing. And in the standard deregulation debate, it often means selecting one of two similar options, right? So you got Chevron, you got Shell. Which do you prefer, right? That's a choice, consumer choice. Or it could mean a choice of substantially different options. It can mean not a gasoline car. It can mean a different kind of car. So not a choice of different gasoline types, but of different car types. It can mean that a choice not to buy something anymore. Not just a choice of what to buy, but the choice not to buy one thing and to buy another thing. So the choice not to buy grid power would be you could say the radical vision of decarbonization, right? That you're just not doing that anymore. You're doing something else. It'd be like choosing a train instead of a car. You're not just buying a different kind of car, an electric car, or a more efficient car. No, you're taking a train. And energy choice can therefore mean deliberately buying less gas and grid power as a choice. And it can mean owning the generation, the system, if you include storage, generation, management systems. It could mean owning that equipment, choosing to own that equipment, not to buy power from the grid or to buy very little power from the grid. So these are the choices of energy transformation, change the nature of choice. So CCA at a high level, the best way to sell it to decision makers, to talk about it persuasively to skeptics, is they've always given low rates. It's an incredibly successful model, and that base case criterion that policymakers use, is this going to help the buyer or hurt the buyer? CCA has been more successful at helping the buyer, and of all sizes and all classes, so-called low middle income, small consumers, small businesses, they in particular uniquely benefit from CCA in a way that large customers normally benefit from deregulation or just from blanket choice, legal choice. It's also outperformed deregulated suppliers. So much in the extreme, because often in many states that have deregulation, deregulated suppliers have higher average rates than monopolies. And so CCAs have beat both of those categories. And so in terms of the credibility of the model, it is in effect now for, actually for 25 years, but 20 years among many entities, 1,500 cities that serve 30 million Americans, so 10% of the United States. It's not new in that respect now. It's becoming part of the mainstream US energy environment to have CCA. Not just to have it legally, which is the case in half of the US energy market, it's legal, but to have it under service, where people are actually getting their power from CCAs. That's 30 million Americans. So they've also succeeded in proving a superior transformative capacity in terms of renewable energy decarbonization in many different ways. So on that base level of, is it greener, is it cheaper? Yes, it's greener, it's cheaper. It's done that over and over again. It's not even controversial on those points. Missy mentioned that this has developed over the years because it started in the early 1990s. The original concept was a very simple concept. It became more complex over time. 1.0, CCA 1.0, which originally was not even called CCA, it was called municipal aggregation, and it only took on the name CCA 10 years later. So it's been many years of development. 1.0, the basic idea was aggregate accounts, get a better deal for everyone, not just for the largest consumers, and then source greener power without having to pay a premium, to be greener without paying more. And that all was achieved in the mid to late 1990s, multiple times. It wasn't really until the late 1990s that this new version 2.0 began to emerge, and that was really a response to some of the shortcomings of the original model. And when I say shortcomings, I mean the original model. The idea was that we would cause a big energy transformation, right? We were selling it as discounts, greener power. We were hoping for much bigger things, and it was delivering discounts and greener power without premiums, but it wasn't delivering transformation. And so 2.0 was developed in California, and the core concept there was, let's neutralize rates as the way that you measure whether a service is good, and just say meet or beat the rate. We're not looking for a discount anymore. We're looking to meet or beat what the customers would otherwise have paid. So it's just neutral. And then whatever the savings there are in that program, apply that to local green renewable energy development, local energy efficiency, use the margins, the superior economics of CCA, the aggregation, those savings as an investment vehicle for greening of power, for building power, what we call additionality, to add new resources onto the grid. Don't just buy green power from the grid, but actually contract directly with renewable energy developers to build assets that are committed for decades at a time to the CCA, not a year-to-year procurement activity, buying certificates, the 1.0 model, shorter-term orientation, discount orientation, shorter-term green power decisions to a longer-term strategic green power decision. That's 2.0. So around 2000, 20 years ago, that model started to develop in California, but it wasn't until 10 years later that it really hit big. And since then, it's completely changed the state of California. So you have today half of the investor and utilities customers in California are in CCAs. They have built I'll tell you about their renewable energy development accomplishments, but it just grew like crazy. And that was really what made CCA kind of break out for a 3.0 iteration, which in some ways, Missy mentioned this, the idea of a CCA that implements decarbonization, radical building level redevelopment, that changes the ownership model into an equity model for customers, as opposed to a third-party financing model, a supplier ownership model. This kind of transformative model is really developed in the last 6-7 years, primarily on the East Coast, and in some ways it's a 1.1 model. It isn't just better than 2.0 in California. It's looking at 1.0, which is what you have. It's a legal framework based on some of the restrictions that deregulation placed on restructuring, a very simplified competitive market that you might end up having in Michigan if you approved it, that you have in all the states other than California, in which retail suppliers are used. California was going straight to wholesale suppliers. It was bypassing the retailer. It was more like public power, municipalization in that respect. 3.0 tries to create flexibility so that municipalities don't have to put in that kind of investment in order to take over that kind of control. And in fact, can achieve much greater things, exponentially greater things, through a different approach to enrolling customers and engaging them in products. So go back to high level here. The idea of green has evolved over the last, well, since my career, 25 years, from a credit structure, renewable energy certificates, which went back to NOx and SOx trading, carbon trading, this model of a financialized commodification of greenness, and the development of legal markets, legal compliance markets across state governments that approve renewable portfolio standard laws, to create trading systems that will stimulate the development of renewable energy. And that's really been the paradigm for the renewable energy industry for the past 25 years. Then you have bundled regional power, where instead of commodifying the renewable attribute of an asset and selling it across markets, you sell the compliance with the power, and they're bound together. And so you have more of a local dimension to the energy. It might be in the state. You have a wind farm or a solar farm in the state, and there's a longer term agreement for that, or a shorter term. But the REC, the renewable energy certificate, is not legally separate from the actual physical supply, and so there are physical consequences of the supply that don't exist when you're just using credits. Actual decarbonization, actual regional economic development, right? Actual grid transition to those assets, actual adaptation of markets to the presence of those generators, etc. Then you go to tariff payments, and this is the net energy metering system that we have in virtual net metering, variations on this model. And those are trying to shift to the building level through a regulatory instrument that compels the utilities to make payments on generated power behind the meter. Those payments, however, are essentially abstract in nature. Their impact on the grid is abstract. They are heavily subsidized, and the pools of funding that support them are inherently limited. And so I like to refer to them as a kind of reservation, where on the reservation you're safe and things make sense. But outside the reservation, it's the old world. It's just cowboys and Indians, and it's the same old game. And so net energy metering is limited to these islands that are 5% of utility annual low duration curve load, or sometimes up to 15, depending on where you're in the United States or the world. But 5% is kind of your standard zone. It's a tiny fraction of the overall market, and therefore a tiny fraction of the greenness, their actual capacity to penetrate that market, very limited. So power purchase agreements are this new wholesale zone, which has occurred more in the last 5-10 years, where there are long-term agreements with different actors in the market that sign actual supply deals with developers who actually install additional new capacity onto the grid. Like bundled regional power, but it's actually built. It's not just purchased from the asset. It finances the asset, right? It is the financial origin of the development of the asset. Without that contract, there is no financing of the asset. And so that's where you start getting more real in terms of this would not have occurred without this deal. It's not just an asset on the grid that you chose to buy power from. It's something that you originated, you made it happen. Now you're starting to get into carbon impacts, because you're adding something physical that would not have been there. And if you're a CCA, like in California, you're doing something beyond what the utility was required to do. So there's additional physical impact from that did not exist in the state systems. It's actually outside the state system, compounding the carbon reductions from that commercial activity. Then you start having community solar, which is the last 5 years, the last 3 years, 2 years in particular around the US intensity around this investment model. And that starts to introduce equity into the bargain, right? Where there's actually a tangible participation of the customer in the asset to varying degrees. And so there's sort of fake community solar, where It's just pay for benefits. It's a green pricing arrangement. They call it community solar, but you're just paying for their financing. And usually they're securitizing their assets and selling them. And so it truly is abstract, and the long-term benefit is laundered. There's a massive dilution that occurs at the back end of carbon benefits from those assets because they are being commodified down the chain. Then there's the new zone that we're in today. And this is what's happening in the past 2 years: building, decarbonization, electrification. This is the new zone. This is where we're finally getting into the end zone of actual change. And it's concerned with taking over gas appliances and electrifying them. That is a big move on the fossil business by the electric business in a big way that really hasn't occurred before. And building decarb has, I think, legs in a way that other initiatives have not had because carbon is the metric. Once you get to a carbon metric, you can't cheat anymore. All of the offshoring vehicles that have financed all the other earlier phases of this process actually can't prove carbon impacts. They're basically fraudulent from a carbon point of view. They don't create carbon impacts. They stimulate markets and they cause profit to occur for parties that do that. But they don't actually cause carbon reduction. Building decarb is saying, no, it has to cause an actual carbon reduction for us to do this. Electrification does it aggressively by taking over the natural gas and heating oil sector. Subtractionality is what I like to call, I think I'm going too long now, I better speed up.
Paul, you got about 15 more minutes, Paul. We could probably stretch that to 20.
Thank you, Mark. I don't have that many slides left, so I'll increase the clip a bit. This is very conceptual. So subtractionality is the idea of not just additionality, which is that you're going to create a new asset by signing a contract that leverages financing for something that would not have been built without that contract. Now you're actually saying we're going to delete load from within buildings through a financing activity so that those meters will slow down on those buildings for decades. They will stop buying power from the grid. So you're not just adding amperage onto high voltage distribution systems or low voltage distribution systems. You are actually deleting it from within buildings. All right, so from an industry point of view, because I know there's some industry people here, this whole structure of building up to today was a planned process that involved the utility industry, and it was deliberately a very slow transition, a series of concessions to regulators and legislatures, in which they agreed to go along with certain processes, but their main goal was not to harm their revenue requirements on their utility systems. And so the first was the investment tax credit, and this set up a dependency. Each of these systems of supporting renewables caused dependency. And that meant that the renewable energy industry, even though it's a whole new direction technologically and a whole new sector, independent, innovative, different from the retail business and the monopoly grid business, it still was depending on those entities to pay them and on regulators to tell them to pay them. So a combination of those two. ITC was the main driver, and it was set up basically to eliminate the benefits of local public finance by giving the same tax exemption to private entities under certain categories of development. And so it was very much part of the old post-war order. The ITC is kind of like, I think of it as a Cold War tool, and it's there to keep that money flowing and allows people to hide money, which is the main function of the finance sector. So they can hide their money here the way they would in Cyprus or some of the tax shelters from various islands. It's a good thing because it financed everything that we have is building today, but it also meant that every single system being built today is extracting systematically the financial value of those systems back into the investment side. And so that's a dependency that we depend on that money, and those bankers end up with all of the benefits of that system in effect. So it's very difficult to share those benefits with consumers or engage them in the savings from those investments when all the value is being sucked out. And it meant that the industry is basically in client relationship with those entities, not with the end use consumer. So contracts with regulated monopolies, that's your sort of PURPA model from the late 70s that grew into deregulation, where utilities are buyers in the wholesale market. Those are short-term markets, spot markets for in deregulated markets for customers that don't find alternative suppliers, which is often a majority of customers. But then also with the deregulated wholesale generators who are in the short-term business, so who do not have an investment relationship to development and are looking to themselves extract all the value of projects based on short-term pricing in the market and so on. So it's sort of a no man's land. It's a cold world that renewable energy has to grow up in. Then there's export tariffs. Those are your net energy metering, and so on. Those are based upon regulator approval, utility cooperation, again, dependency. Certificate markets are another version of that. Demand response is a recent innovation, but which is still heavily dependent on third-party trading platforms that are subject to regulatory control and are therefore unpredictable. And then there are niche markets, and that's your classic solar market. So part of the high level, again, CCA, part of what we're bringing to this situation of the industry is a different counterparty. The idea here is get out of the short-term market, get out of the monopoly with the regulator, forcing them to take your power every 6 months or not, and changing conditions. Municipalities are your counterparty. They want long-term relationships. They're non-volatile. They're not parties in the game. They're looking for benefits for their users. So a rational counterparty is part of what CCA brings to the industry, not an adversarial, manipulative sort of game player, which is what you have with the utility and various stripes. Municipalities have their faults, but in the case of CCAs, they're not municipal utilities that own assets and want to play the market. They're buyers and they want a good deal for their customers. So it's a fairly simple relationship. It's a long-term relationship. It's a long-term process. It's not a day-to-day market. It's not you put out marketing and wait for people to sign up for your product. You enter into a long-term contract with a municipality and you're serving that community, and you either do well or you don't do well. You use local planning. So, obviously your client, the CCA, or municipalities, they're planning entities. They control permitting. They also control public rights of way. Often they own the public rights of way. They have franchise agreements with the utility. They have leverage in the game that you do not have as an industry. They can contract with you and they can leverage the utility cooperation in that process. So, and then finally, and most importantly, local governments are the most sort of the thinnest layer of separation to the customer, and which is undervalued in the market, that people may hate the government, but they know what it is. They know that it's not a criminal. They might not approve of it, but they trust its basic content. So as far as primary relationship to end users, there is nothing better than a municipality. So 2.0 in California, this 2004 to 2014 that led to, since 2014, all this development, 7 gigawatts that they have committed for development. I don't know what the number is built yet, but it's the greater part of the 7 gigs already built. And US-wide, almost every single 100% clean renewable energy city is a CCA in California. It basically is the 100% renewable cities movement is CCA 2.0 in California. So 3.0 is taking another step now. It's saying, all right, we achieved building local wind farms and solar farms. Now what we want to do is change the model. And we want to use the relationship that each municipality has with its individual resident business to engage them, and above just the aggregation layer of receiving service and not opting out of the service, to actively choose new products. And those products are defined as not inside the utility system. So it's not just buying credits or a virtual community solar product where someone else owns it and you don't get the power and you don't get the money. But instead, an ROI, a return on investment proposition to the customer that forecasts the savings that will be caused by a measure for them, in which they'll participate, and the payback based on that measure. And then they can make a decision whether to participate. And so those measures are developed projects in multiple technology silos. So the idea here, based on a carbon pathway, is all a so-called addressable carbon. And so it isn't just looking at plug power. which is your classic CCA, just when people plug into buildings. It's also looking at heating, that's so-called electrification or convergence. Vehicles, because of the immediate onset of vehicle to building and vehicle to grid technology, vehicles are the elephant in the room for on the carbon side. So is heat. And then finally waste, which is the landfill, the sewer system, right? Currently, the landfill is going to the bottom of the ocean. This is a problem. This is an energy issue. And so it brings all these silos into consideration as resources. And it includes them programmatically in terms of the options that are on the table, what to include in that system. But it's trying to shift from this import-export model that we have today. And this is an image of on-site power today, net energy metering or any version of exporting permits, virtual net metering, in which the building is actually not being powered by the on-site power system. It's being powered by the grid. The on-site power system is a merchant generator selling power back to the utility. That's the current system. And that has consequences, and which I don't have time to get into, but I think you'll appreciate it from a carbon point of view, what this means, that the grid's activity does not physically change. Its generation profile does not change. The load duration curves of the supplying entity do not change. The load serving requirements, the capacity requirements, the balancing requirements, all of the basic combustive elements of generation are unchanged on the old system. So we're trying to change a new system where it is changed. And not just change in a little way, but change almost entirely. That we want to use the grid. We to attempt to make autonomous building, right? And any kind of scheme that says you can do that, really not credible right now. It may be credible soon, but it's not really credible right now.
And I think I told you that I wanted to have a monthly report on water. Anyway.
Maybe that's Rita.
Please mute you guys.
Maybe that's Rita. I'll back up here. So to a 90-10 relationship, right? Maybe it's not 90. The models we've made a bunch of models over the years. San Francisco, Sonoma County, working for Cambridge right now, we make models. And 90 is definitely the highest end zone you're going to get into, right? But we've done a bunch of models that are in the mid 80s, 70s. You can do a lot in buildings, depending on how much you're integrating. And so this new model is saying, let's include the heating systems in the buildings. When we look at photovoltaics on microgrids, let's look at the heating systems. Let's look at the vehicles. We can subscribe customers based upon the more effective engagement tool of the CCA to communicate directly from the municipality to each individual person, business, resident, to say, there's an opportunity here to change your whole building. And that means not just giving you solar panels or sourcing panels. It means changing out your heating systems. It means even changing out your vehicles. And so car share, right? To employ car share as a storage vehicle for microgrids, and to use integrated heating systems also as storage systems, and to build up the robustness of on-site generation in buildings that are grid connected for that 10%. But they're not exporting at all back onto the grid. And now this sounds like a minor thing in a way, but it's not. It's the major thing, because what makes the net metering, the energy metering model so limited is its need to export to pay off the system. If you don't need to export to pay off the system, then you go from a tiny fraction, because the net metering tariff payments limit you to 5% of the utility system. If you're not requiring those payments to finance your asset, which is the case here, where you're not exporting at all back to the grid, you're sinking that power into the cars, the heating systems, and the live loads in the buildings. Those are absorbing, and those are being consumed, and those are paying back the debt on the asset. That means that you do not need a payment from the utility. And the result of that is that there is no cap on how much you can transform that system. And the utility has no legal basis to challenge your capacity to make that change. They have no claim upon revenues on your meters. They have zero recourse to stop you from doing it. But it does require this incredible amount of integration on the site and this amazing level of ability to engage customers where they would actually sign up, not just for solar, but for a car and a heating system and all these things at the same time. Why? Because they actually trust you. Why? Because you're the town. And the town is doing this thing. You're not just an energy supplier. So the penetration strategy it's a non-exporting microgrid. It involves car share, it involves heat share, and hot water share. Go back up to the high level. What you're really doing is you're capturing, compared to a traditional CCA, which is just capturing the plugs on this equation, it's about a quarter. I mean, it's actually less than a quarter than all these 4 energy wallets combined. You're grabbing the whole energy wallet, to put it very kind of frankly, that this is a lot of money. Every month people pay for their gasoline, their heat, their power, and their waste. And you're saying, let's bring these all under management as an integrated resource. You're also saying, this isn't going to be owned by someone else. This is going to be owned by the end users. And we're going to set up for the municipality a structure where their monthly bill, in different ways, flexible ways, depending on the situation, if they're a renter, an owner, single homeowner, multi-residential, mixed use, different situations or different contract product structure, what we call a product, but it's more like recycling. It just says, we're doing this thing. We want you to go along with it. It's not a product. It's something that the community is doing, and we would like you to do it, just like recycling. And yes, it involves you owning something now, and it also involves you cooperating, like a car share. You're going to cooperate around your cars. Heat share, your heating systems and your neighbors are going to be the same equipment. You're separate otherwise. The bills are handled like you're separate, but physically it's one heating system, not 50 in a building. And then there's the possibility of cooperatives, which is a more active model of sharing. And that's in these days, I like to talk about these various innovative single building microgrids that are occurring around the country, where neighbors in a multi-residential building combine their accounts. Often they're using cryptocurrency or that kind of a structure to do it. We don't need to do that because we have the CCA. It can administer these relationships in a trustworthy fashion. But to cooperate in that way, where you're sharing an asset through an administrative platform that is neutral and trustworthy. And so you're able to cooperate without being friends, so to speak, with your neighbors, which is obviously would present significant problems. So it's using that CC aggregation vehicle to sort of shepherd people into cooperation, make it easy to cooperate. And so we're talking about four monthly bills at a high level, like going back again to the investment scale, that you're talking about populations, in 20-year investment frameworks times 4 bills. And that, even electricity alone on that model is a lot of money. If you combine all of those energy bills, you're talking about the greater part of really the local economy. I mean, this is what people pay for mostly. The program can launch in 1 year. The build-out models we generally put them in 5-year blocks. That 5 years, if you have political approval right now, you can be done in 5 years. If you don't have it right now, you'll be done 5 years after you do. So it's 2030 framework is that's what we're doing. We're pushing this as a 2030 framework for people that are tied into that. And so I'll hand over. Share back.
Well, thank you very much, Paul and Missy. I think that's really stimulating. We have time for some questions. Why don't you raise your hands and I'll call on you. Let's keep our questions narrow so we can get as many done as possible. John Mirsky, why don't you go first?
Thanks. I put my questions in the chat. So if the conventional grid will only provide 10% of power needs in the future to the CCA energy loop, or to total needs maybe is a better way of putting it, won't existing utilities fight CCAs every step of the way? And then at the risk of asking you to show your cards, what are tangible steps that Ann Arbor and advocates like us can or plan or should take to implement CCAs in Michigan? Thanks.
Okay, John, I'll try to hit those points. the microgrid model, the 90-10 is a microgrid model. So that's what a building could do. The CCAs and the model we've done are like San Francisco, we only got into the mid-50s that we could actually do. And San Francisco is one of the most challenging CCAs ever dealt with because of the Pacific weather system. It's basically has its own natural air conditioner, so it's naturally efficient, and there's no revenue in the cost of service because there's not enough peaking from a supplier point of view. So that's like the low end, 50%. The high end that we've seen, and you also get low ends in places that have coal-fired power, that have really low price points, and there's almost no margin against the cost of service from a coal supply, or really poor renewables laws. So that's where you're like 50% power only. That's power only. The high end, the aggregate level, in my experience, is from the high 70s and mid 80s. And we've done some that were really exhaustive studies, and you could do that. You really could do that. And so, yes, that presents a problem for the utility. Now, but let me back off from the question. Because the utilities are they're in a position caused by their success in delaying penetration of renewables and competitors into their system. So they're victims of their own success, because during that period, the price of photovoltaics has dropped to this insanely low level. And in fact, the only thing keeping photovoltaics from wiping them out is the fact that state regulatory regimes incentivize developers to game the market and drive up the price to several times the actual cost, including well-compensated labor. So you have these artificially expensive photovoltaics based on the incentive frameworks that states have created to incentivize solar. And as a result, the actual threshold price points that utilities face are approaching so-called user revolts, right? Where people are just gonna put in solar. And so this brick wall is heading their way, and they do know that. And so they're trying to do things like create fixed charges on the monthly bill, and to penalize solar, and various draconian measures to poison the well. But the price of PV keeps coming down, and that's just PV. Then you have the advent of automation and storage, which are these overpowering quantum factors that will basically just destroy them. And so they're trying to now put in big batteries all over the grid and do things to try to grab the battery, and they're trying to make a grab on these new assets. So I look at them as, and I've always I've worked in California, I had to fight the utilities in California. There's probably very few entities in the United States more politically powerful than Pacific Gas and Electric, and I mopped the floor with them. I wiped them out. And so when people say, oh, the utilities never allow this, I just say, yeah, but not really, because the issue in California was just that it's a really limited, I'm sure you'd all appreciate this. You're in the business of lobbying for the industry and trying to eke out a space. It's a very small room. There are not very many people participating. Once you get any kind of participation going in this space, it overwhelms their ability to stop things politically. They only win because there's no one in the room. And so it's an old boys kind of situation, and they have clay feet. So I always like to say to people that their power is overrated. It really is. And the real issue is, can you get an initiative going which is really focused on a credible outcome? And the credible outcome, in my view, is decarbonization, right? It's very difficult to argue against the idea of climate action because it's essentially treasonous at this point for the energy industry to do that. And even Chevron, Exxon, they're having to eat crow right now, right? So it's a moving target, and we're very well positioned right now to make them back off. And so looking at them from a deregulation point of view, yeah, they have a very good argument against deregulation as it was done in California and Texas. There's no doubt about that. And if they ever say California and Texas, you say absolutely. I mean, they totally blew it. So, but what came out of California was, after they blew it, they passed community choice. And then that fixed the market. In fact, it's the only good thing in that market. and it's half of the market today. And it's predicted to be, by the utilities, 80 through 85% of the market in a few years. The entire market's going to be CCA. So it's exceeded so wildly, and they're not bankrupt. They're covered. You know, this is a cooperative model. It doesn't take them out. That's the whole point. If they continue to crush the industry, they will go bankrupt. There will be a day when they go bankrupt, and they will not be restored. They will be destroyed. And so CCA really is a middle path that says, here's a peaceful way. We want to control supply. You have the wires. Maybe you want to control car chargers. What they're mostly doing is trying to control the car chargers. They could smell the blood on car chargers, and they could smell the blood on electrification and heating. Those are massive loads. So their loads in their system are going to grow massively in the next 5 to 10 years. They know that. So it's not like a zero-sum game like it was 5 years ago, where if CCAs took over, there's nothing left. Now it's who's going to develop all this new stuff. And the utilities should also acknowledge, and this is what I would say to them, is it make them admit they don't have the autonomy to execute themselves. They actually need other actors to execute these new technologies. They just need to position themselves in relation to it so they don't get wiped out. They have a lot of leverage to do that, particularly to the extent that they cooperate. And so microgrids do that, distribution upgrades, low voltage distribution upgrades. That's a massive new investment opportunity. If you do a lot of local DG, you're going to upgrade not the high transmission lines, not the high voltage. That's obsolete idea. That whole direction in policy is a horrible
So
mistake.
I have to step in here. So it's 8 o'clock, and we need to bring this to a closure. Paul, I really appreciate it. I'm going to ask you to come back. I can see a wonderful session with you and our senior policy advisor, John Richter, on this subject alone, and get down to the question that I think John raised. What do we do? What do we do in Michigan, and how do we start this ball rolling, and how do we get this done? So with that, John Freeman, I want to let you have the last word here. You got a meeting coming up in June. You want to talk a bit about that and talk about inviting?
Oh, sure, Mark. We're having GLRA is having an event on June 26th, where we're going to be celebrating the 30th anniversary of this organization's founding. We're going to be having Douglas Jesser as a guest speaker to talk about where we've been and where we're going with the transformation of energy from fossil fuels to renewables. And this is also acting as somewhat of a fundraiser for the organization. And so I would encourage everybody to buy a ticket. The tickets are tax deductible because we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. You can go on the website, or you can send me an email about the event, and I would encourage all of you to attend. And I want to thank everybody for joining this evening. I want to thank our guests. Missy, you are on the cutting edge in Ann Arbor. You are a city of shining light for the rest of the day. And so we really enjoy partnering with you, and enjoy working with you every day of the week. And so I'm going to turn it back over to you, Mark, to have the final say.
Well, Ann Arbor is obviously the tip of the spear on CCA, and so we need Missy there, and we really appreciate what she's doing. And again, Paul, thank you so much. But well, I'm sure we'll be talking to both of you soon, and
Thank you.
also asking both of you to come back. So I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. Again, anybody wants more on this, they can send me your email. We did an article on MI Sun and this round on this issue of CCA, and we'll be covering this subject in depth more going forward. Thank you so much. Remember, we're doing these seminars 4 times a month, every Thursday, and we invite you to come to all of them. And if not, I'll see most of you, I hope, in a month. Take care.
Thanks.